My son's wife didn't even look back as she thrust the eviction notice into my trembling hands and barked, "You have 72 hours to leave. 72 hours to strip a lifetime of memories from these walls." The laughter my late wife and I shared in the kitchen, the echo of my son's first steps in the hallway. I stood there, heart pounding, as her parents, strangers in my own home, ambled past me, dragging boxes for their new rooms. In that brutal instant, I realized my own family had betrayed me, and the next morning, I decided to sell the house. I remember the day I met Marie as clearly as yesterday. The sun was just dipping behind the hills, and she stood by the town's little bookstore, clutching a tattered copy of a poetry collection. I was 17, lanky and awkward, but when I offered to walk her home, something inside me knew she was the one I'd spend my life with. We married the next spring, using my savings from part-time work at the lumber yard to buy a modest plot of land where we'd build our home together. Brick by brick, plank by plank, we raised that house ourselves. I dug the foundation with a borrowed shovel while Marie painted our initials on the first beam, and I still have that beam tucked away in the workshop. Every nail I drove held the promise of laughter and children and Sunday dinners under a roof we'd made with our own hands. By the time our son David arrived, the walls were already humming with our dreams. In those early years, routine felt sacred. I'd leave the house before dawn to tend the fields, roses and vegetables that Marie sold at the market stall we ran out front. I'd whistle as I worked, thinking of how she'd greet me each evening with a dinner of fresh bread, stew, and a glowing smile. After supper, we'd sit on the porch swing, watching fireflies drift across the lawn as David trailed after his first wooden train set, his giggles echoing like church bells. I taught our boy to fish at dawn, to whistle through the pines, and to respect the sweat that went into every harvest. Marie taught him kindness, to share his toys, to help neighbors bring in groceries, and to read until his eyes fluttered shut. In our family, honesty was everything. If money was tight, we talked about it over the same stew pot. If someone was struggling, we shared what little we had. Respect was the mortar that bound us all together. As our family grew, so did the house. An extra room here, a sunroom there, always with a handshake and a promise that no one would ever feel cold or unwelcome under this roof. At every winter's end, Marie baked a honey-glazed ham and invited our neighbors for a feast, the long table groaning under pies and casseroles, laughter and music spilling into the yard. We were the home everyone looked to when storms came. It was my greatest pride. I worked hard. Early mornings in the field, late nights fixing the roof, weekends rebuilding the fence after a storm. But I never missed David's baseball games, even if I arrived with oil stains on my sleeve and missing buttons on my jacket. I was there when he got his first strikeout, when his voice cracked singing in the school play, and when he brought home the shy girl who would become his wife years later. Through all of it, Marie remained my anchor. She listened patiently to my worries, about bills, about the frost that threatened the spring crops, about the ache in my back that would not go away. I thought I could lean on her forever. I thought the love that built these walls would hold everything else: time, age, change. I never suspected that the most dangerous cracks would come from inside. Over the years, I noticed little things. David's voice a shade sharper when he talked about the farm. Marie's quiet sighs as she hung the housecoat by the back door. My own breath catching when I walked into the living room and found it empty. But I was too busy to worry. There were always fields to plow, gutters to clean, guests to welcome. I assumed that in this house, our bonds were as strong as the oak beam above the front door. I used to sit by the window at night, watching the lights flicker out one by one in the neighboring homes, thankful for the glow of our lamps and the warmth of my family's breathing next to me. I took pride in the creak of the floorboards under my feet, the same floorboards our children learned to walk on. Every creak was a memory: the midnight dance with Marie when the music came on unexpectedly, the chaos of birthday parties where streamers tangled on the chandelier, the first terrified steps David took after his solo bike ride down the lane. In the soft hush between dusk and dawn, the time when the world felt paused, I often reflected on the life we'd built. A life of sacrifice, certainly, hands calloused beyond recognition, nights spent worrying instead of resting, pockets lighter than the weight on my heart, but also a life of pride. Pride in providing for my family, in teaching my son to stand tall, in watching Marie's face light up every morning when she poured tea. All those years, I believed my worth was measured in the stone foundation beneath my feet and the family that gathered at our table. I never doubted that, no matter the storms, no matter the debts, no matter the occasional argument, this house, our house, would shelter us and hold our love. I never imagined that the very walls we raised would one day echo with her words, "Pack your things." I never thought that the person I taught to respect hard work and honesty would turn those values into weapons against me. Yet, in that belief, lay my greatest vulnerability, the assumption that loyalty ran as deep in their hearts as it did in mine. I knew the good years so intimately, the warmth of summer mornings, the crackle of the fireplace in winter, the laughter that threaded through every room, that I could not fathom a day when those joys would be ripped away. And so, even as I brushed aside the uneasy moments, I remained complacent, secure in the cocoon we'd spun together. Looking back, I see how the smallest fissures can become canyons if left unattended. I see the day I laughed off her curt remark at Christmas dinner, the night I ignored his quiet frustration when I asked to join their plans. I see how I mistook their growing distance for mere busyness, how I excused the tension as the price of progress. I never realized that love, like wood, can rot from within if not cared for, and that the foundation I so painstakingly poured could one day crack under betrayal's weight. But those were my good years. They are the chapters I cling to now, before everything fell apart, before the eviction notice arrived, before the echo of my own footsteps in the empty hallway became my only company. They remind me of who I once was, the loving father, the devoted husband, the man who believed in the bonds of blood. And they stand in stark contrast to the world I face today, where the only certainty is that the home we built is no longer mine to hold. I first sensed the shift the evening I brought home Marie's favorite lemon tart from the bakery. I'd pulled into the driveway, humming a tune she used to sing, and knocked on the kitchen door, only to find it swung open as if I were an intruder. My daughter-in-law, Regina, peered at me over her phone, brow furrowed. "You're home early," she said, voice clipped. She didn't step aside, she didn't say hello. I held the box out, a peace offering, and she glanced at it like it might bite her. I forced a smile. "Thought you might like this." Regina tapped her screen. "We're busy," she said, tapping again. "David's teaching my folks tonight." She didn't invite me in. I stood there for a moment, tart in hand, before I nodded and retreated, the door clicking shut behind me. I ate my slice at the table alone. The lemon filling was still sweet, but it tasted like ashes in my mouth. It wasn't always like this. Just last spring, Regina would beam at my baking, claimed I had the best pie crust in the county. But that afternoon she didn't thank me. She didn't even offer a glance. And David, my own son, didn't lift his eyes from his phone when I walked in. He mumbled, "Hey, Dad," before disappearing into the living room. I shrugged it off at first. Maybe she was having a bad day. I told myself, trust your family, as I always had. But the change was in the details. At breakfast, I would pour coffee and catch Regina's reflection in the cupboard door, her jaw set, her arms hugging herself. She'd pick at her eggs and say, "Do we have to do this every morning?" As though the table I'd cleaned and set was a burden on her soul. Once she leaned close and muttered, "You don't understand how things work these days." I blinked, spoon hovering. "I just want to help," I said. "This kitchen is part of my life too." She shook her head, impatient. "People don't work that way anymore, Grandpa." And I caught David's eyes. He watched, lips pressed together, but he didn't intervene. There were other moments, her hand brushing mine as I passed the salt, her door closing softly when I tried to step inside her room to retrieve a missing sweater I'd laundered. She installed new locks without telling me. A forbidden room, she called it to the contractor when I still had keys. I found the contractor's invoice among the mail, $350 for hardware. She'd passed the cost on to me in the monthly statement. Finances had never been a mystery in our home. I'd shown David where every dollar went, explained why a repair was necessary, and how each payment kept our legacy alive. But now the statements arrived in the mail slot. No greeting, no just checking in note. Only cold black ink on white paper. It was as though I were a tenant instead of the man who'd raised the roof. At family dinners, I became a guest of diminishing importance. Regina presided over the table, directing traffic like a conductor. "Dad, can you pass the gravy?" "Grandpa, would you mind taking this to the sink?" Each request pushed me farther from the center. Once I set down the bowl with a gentle clatter, and she didn't look at me. The crackle of her napkin sounded louder than her indifference. I started timing how long it took for my plate to be emptied. 10 minutes one night, 5 the next. There was no eye contact, no thank you. I recognized my late wife's empty seat at the head, the one she always claimed, and mine beside it, now ignored. I fought the urge to slide into silence, but I clung to small rituals, pouring a second cup of tea, offering to clear the table, humming an old hymn. She'd sigh and say, "Stop doing that," as though I'd developed a new annoyance. The worst was the tone. Regina's "please" and "thank you" became barbed. When I asked her to help me carry groceries inside, she replied, "If you're going to be this helpless, maybe you shouldn't live alone." My breath caught so hard that I nearly dropped the milk. My vision blurred for an instant. I remembered stepping over shallow puddles in our unfinished basement 50 years ago, carrying feed for newborn chicks, rolling up my sleeves to mend the leaky sink for Marie. I had never been helpless. David witnessed it all, silent and tense. I could see the conflict in his eyes, love for his wife, loyalty to his father, but not once did he speak up. Instead, after these cutting remarks, he'd avert his gaze, hands finding his pockets or brushing his hair back as though he were ashamed. That silence wounded me more than Regina's words. Still, I clung to hope. I thought if I worked harder, showed more deference, perhaps she'd soften. I offered to pay for their parents' weekend visit, assuming hospitality might thaw the frost. They arrived, her mother's purse bigger than her smile, her father poised and polite. I greeted them warmly, gave them the sweet Marie once called my favorite nook, and prepared a dinner of roast beef and Yorkshire pudding, my specialty. At the table, they ate politely, but spoke only to Regina. I asked her father if he'd like more potatoes. He nodded briefly, then turned back to his phone. Her mother commented on the wallpaper, but said nothing about the tablecloth I'd embroidered. I listened to Regina's laughter at their jokes, realized it wasn't meant to include me. And in that laughter, I felt the concrete of my own foundations crumble. Yet I still brushed these moments aside. After all, families quarrel. They go through phases. I would talk to David. I would remind him of what we once had. I would lean on the memory of Marie, her gentle nudges when I grew too proud, or our equal partnership that turned house into home. But between the creeping coldness and the soft-spoken dismissals, the message was clear. I was becoming irrelevant, and the man who once taught his boy to stand tall found himself shrinking, paper-thin, fit only for charity visits or polite anonymity. By the time I slipped into bed that night, I realized the true wound wasn't Regina's words. It was David's silence. I pressed my hand to the mattress, turning away from the dark room that should have felt like sanctuary. The moonlight pooled across the floorboards, and I wondered how a house built on love could so quietly shut its doors against me. Something inside me stirred, a knot of unease and resolve that would not be soothed by apology or explanation. The signs of shift were no longer small. They were the tremors before an earthquake, and I had only just begun to feel their pull. I arrived at the backyard that Sunday afternoon, expecting the familiar warmth of family, the sizzle of burgers on the grill, Marie's old radio playing softly on the porch, David and Regina laughing as they chased the kids around the yard. Instead, I found Regina standing atop the picnic table, arms crossed, her heels tapping the wood like a judge's gavel. The laughter died as I approached, replaced by an awkward hush that buzzed in my ears, louder than any music. She looked down at me, her lips curling into something like triumph. "Welcome, Grandpa," she called out, voice dripping with false sweetness. "You'll find the locks have been changed." Confusion froze me mid-step. I stared at the front door where a brand-new keypad glowed. That keypad cost $300, she'd told me without apology. It cost much more in humiliation. David stepped forward, cheeks red, eyes darting between us. "Dad, he began, but Regina cut him off with a sharp raise of her hand. "Let him finish," she snapped. "I'm merely protecting our home. You can't expect him to respect our privacy." Her words were light, almost airy, as if eviction were a mere detail in a to-do list. My chest tightened. "This is my home," I said, voice strangled. "These walls, that door, they're mine as much as yours." I gestured to the siding, to the porch swing that Marie had painted, to the roses I'd planted with trembling hands after her funeral. "I built them. I lived them. How can you—" She shook her head, stepping down from the table and brushing invisible dust from her skirt. "Your time here is done," she interrupted. "We've decided it's best if you move into assisted living. I've already scheduled visits." A round of polite applause rippled from the bystanders, neighbors and in-laws, summoned as witnesses to my disgrace. I saw Mrs. Patel from down the street shift uncomfortably, her eyes darting away. I saw my grandson's lower lip tremble as he pulled at his mother's skirt, and I saw David's silent acceptance, his shoulders slumping as though relieved the spotlight had shifted away from him. A wave of shame and rage battered me. My voice came out rough. "You think I'm incapable? You think I'm a burden?" Regina's smile hardened. "I think you're obsolete," she said, blunt and unrepentant. "We have our own life now." In that moment the guests, family, old friends, neighbors, did nothing. Not one person challenged her. They stood as silent judges, passing sentence with their absence of protest. I felt the gall of betrayal burn in my veins. This was not merely exclusion. It was a concerted humiliation. I dropped my gaze to the picnic table, thinking of the times I'd sanded its planks smooth, of the summer evenings I'd hosted bingo nights and listening parties for the neighborhood kids. Now it served as her podium for exile. My heart pounded so loud I thought it might burst. David finally spoke, voice small. "Dad, let's talk inside." He reached for my arm, but I shook it off. The sun beat down, the grill spat fat into the coals, and the laughter of children, once a melody of home, sounded like taunts. I straightened, chest heaving. "No," I said, "we're ending this here." I turned toward the driveway, each step heavy as the souvenirs in my pockets. An old harmonica, a faded photograph of Marie, a half-wilted daisy she once pressed in a book. Regina watched me go, head tilted, phone raised as though recording my retreat. Behind me I heard whispers, some sympathetic, some scandalized, but no footsteps followed. The screen door slammed and I felt the world tilt beneath me. I realized, with a sick twist in my gut, that not only had they stolen my home, they'd stolen my dignity as well. I walked to the tool shed, sank onto the cool stone step, and closed my eyes. Flashes of my father's barn rose in my mind, of the day I first learned how to swing a hammer, of the promise I made to protect what I built. And now I was powerless, stripped of both the promise and the protection. When I returned to the house later, there was a ribbon of yellow police tape across the door, not because of crime, but because Regina had called them when I tried to unlock the front with my old key. They left when they realized it was a civil matter, hands in pockets murmuring about trespassing. The sight of that tape felt like a scar across my face. Inside, I found the living room rearranged, all photos of Marie and me replaced with framed, overpriced prints Regina's parents gifted. All the family heirlooms relegated to boxes in the garage. My favorite recliner, where I'd napped after Sunday dinner, gone, sold to a consignment shop. A handwritten note pinned to the empty space read, "Please respect our new decor. Love, R." I sat on the floor, the afternoon light narrowing to a single beam that cut across the carpet like a spotlight. In its brightness, I saw dust motes dance, indifferent to human sorrow. I felt nothing but the cold hinge of finality. I was unwanted here, in the place my hands had shaped, the place my heart had consecrated. When David finally found me, hours later, in the darkening living room, he knelt beside me, eyes red. He pleaded, "Dad, I'm sorry. I didn't know she'd go this far." I looked at him, at the son I once taught to fish, to respect others, to cherish family. I realized then that love had become a fault line between us. I said nothing. I turned away. I didn't want his apology. I wanted his loyalty. And in that absence, I felt a deeper wound than any eviction could inflict. Outside, the sun sank behind the trees. Inside, an old house held its breath. I had been betrayed in the one place I never imagined could harbor betrayal, the very home I built with my own two hands. I didn't realize how far the rot had spread until the afternoon I stumbled into Regina's office, a corner of the sunroom she'd claimed for her study. I was chasing the cat, Muffin, who darted through the window I'd left open, when I noticed the file on her desk, a crisply folded envelope emblazoned with the county clerk's seal. My heart thudded as I recognized the words, typed in neat script, "Deed Transfer Application." I froze in the doorway. The sunlight slanted across the polished oak floor, illuminating a recording device perched beside the envelope. My breath ragged, I reached for the small speaker and pressed play. Regina's voice crackled through. "I've arranged everything. They signed the papers last week. As of next Tuesday, the house belongs to us." A quiet click, and then David's voice, low and hesitant. "Are you sure this won't—" "I'm sure," she said, cutting him off. "He won't understand until it's done." The tape spat out a hiss of static, but I'd heard enough. My hands shook so badly I had to brace myself against the windowsill. The same windowsill that Marie used to lean on when she read her morning letters. I recalled how she'd sighed with contentment as she watched me coax seedlings from the soil, her eyes bright with pride. I felt a hollow ache, realizing those mornings were gone forever. I slipped away before they returned, clutching the envelope and the recorder like contraband. I went to the garage, sat on a milk crate, and replayed the conversation in my mind. He won't understand until it's done. She meant me. They'd planned to wrest away the very ground beneath my feet. It wasn't neglect anymore. It was an outright coup. That night, I lay awake, haunted by the echoes of Marie's voice in my memory. I remembered the day she whispered to me, "Promise me we'll leave this world with our love intact, not chained by bitterness." I'd squeezed her hand and vowed to protect her until my last breath. Now, I felt as though I'd already broken that promise. Over the next few days, I started collecting evidence. I found corporate letters about her parents moving in, invoices for renovations they never discussed with me, and, most damning, a draft of my own will that bore my signature in her handwriting. My breath caught when I realized she'd slipped into my study last winter and forged my signature to carve me out of my last wishes. A cold dread seeped into my chest. This was no mere eviction. It was premeditated erasure. I remembered the nights when I'd sat by the bedside, reading to Marie when her cough kept her awake, feeling her small hand press against mine in gratitude. How could I have missed the signs? How did I never suspect that the woman I welcomed into our home would so deliberately dismantle it from the inside? I felt a rush of shame, both for my blindness and for the years I'd handed over trust, without question. But beneath the shame flickered a fierce spark of resolve. I could almost hear Marie's gentle reproach. "You must stand for what's yours." So I began to observe every interaction with new eyes. When Regina casually suggested charitable uses for our bedroom furniture, I realized she'd already sold the antiques. When David bowed his head at family gatherings, I saw the conflict in his posture. Guilt that he couldn't speak up, loyalty split between his wife and his blood. I started cataloging details, dates, times, names. I took the recorder to a local friend, the retired police captain who'd once taught me how to lock my toolbox against thieves. He listened, frowned, and offered me a brown leather notebook. "Record everything," he said. "You'll need proof if you want to fight back." His words settled like stones in a glass of water. Clarity rippled through me. Yet even as I gathered evidence, loneliness crept in. The mail carrier no longer greeted me by name. Neighbors crossed the street to avoid my gaze. The store owner I'd known for decades now rang up my groceries in silence. I realized how thoroughly Regina had isolated me, cutting off not just my home, but my community. One evening, I found myself in Marie's old armchair, the one with the faded floral print. I cradled the recorder in my trembling hands and pressed play once more. Regina's words echoed, fierce and unrepentant. I pressed stop, took a deep breath, and whispered, "Not anymore." I tucked the recorder and the deed application into my satchel. I rehearsed the conversation I'd have with the lawyer I'd known since my first house payment. A man who'd once advised me on every mortgage, refinance, and insurance policy. I felt a swell of purpose. They would not rewrite my story without my voice. I slept little that night. I dreamt of Marie's garden in full bloom, of David's first steps across the freshly tilled patch of soil. I dreamt of the day I etched his name into the beam above the fireplace, and I resolved that no scheme, no silent conspiracy would strip me of that legacy. The next morning, I rose before dawn. I brewed tea, packed the recorder and the envelope in my coat pocket, and left the house quietly, as though I were sneaking out to keep a secret vigil. As the door clicked behind me, I glanced back at the windows where shadows of past joys still lingered. I felt the weight of my solitude, but also the thrill of reclaiming my own narrative. I walked down the dusty lane toward the lawyer's office, each step echoing with purpose. I would face them all, Regina, David, the neighbors who'd turned away, and I would tell my story, every hurtful word, every clandestine action. They'd begun planning in whispers. I would meet them in daylight. And in that moment, I knew the war for my home had truly begun. Have you ever felt betrayed by your own family? Let us know in the comments. I sat across from Regina at the kitchen table one Tuesday afternoon, tea cooling in our mismatched china cups, determined to speak calmly. My father's old watch ticked between us, its steady rhythm a reminder of how time had carried us from brighter days to this fractured moment. I cleared my throat and said, "Regina, we need to talk about the deed application I found." Her lips curved into a practiced smile. "Oh, that," she said, swirling her Earl Grey. "I was just looking out for David's future. You know how the bank can be." She set her cup down, eyes bright. "You're getting on in years, Grandpa. It's better this way." I leaned forward. "You forged my signature. You hid those papers in my study. You've changed the locks on my bedroom. Do you realize how cruel that is?" Her smile never faltered. "Cruel? I'm protecting our family." "You've become a liability." She paused, letting the word hang in the air. "Maybe assisted living would suit you. People there know how to care for the elderly." I felt the old sting in my chest, the same ache I'd felt the first time she dismissed my baking or ignored my presence at dinner. But this time I refused to shrink. I pressed my hands flat on the table. "This house is not a liability. It's my home. I built it with Marie. I raised my son under this roof, and you have no right to strip that away." She laughed softly, shaking her head. "Emotions won't pay the mortgage or maintain the roof, Grandpa. I'm doing you a favor. You should be grateful." Her tone was glossy, practiced, like a teacher consoling a child who didn't understand. At that moment, I realized how deftly she'd gaslighted me, reframing my home and memories as burdensome inconveniences. But beneath her composure, I saw a flicker of impatience, her fingers tapping a silent rhythm on the ceramic saucer. I recognized that impatience from years ago, when I'd argued with Marie about selling our farm. That spark told me she knew she'd crossed a line. Before I could speak again, the doorbell chimed. Mrs. Caldwell, our next-door neighbor of 30 years, peered in through the window. Her kind face was lined with concern. I nodded at her, and she slipped in behind Regina as though she belonged. "Charles?" she said softly, using my given name. "I came by to see how you were holding up." Regina's smile faltered. "Thank you, Mrs. Caldwell, but we're just having tea." Mrs. Caldwell ignored her and turned to me. "I heard about what happened at the backyard barbecue," she said, her voice low. "I'm sorry, dear." She patted my hand. "You don't deserve any of this." I felt a flicker of warmth in my chest. "Thank you," I said. I want things to be fair." Mrs. Caldwell nodded. "I know, and if you need anything, I'm here." She glanced at Regina, steady and unafraid. Regina's lips twitched before she masked it with politeness. At that moment, I felt the first swell of real support. It mattered that at least one person saw my truth.
Once Mrs. Caldwell left, Regina regained her composure. "See?" she said, raising an eyebrow. "Even the neighbors think you're pathetic." I let her words roll off me like water on a stone. "If defending my home is pathetic," I said, "then I'd rather be pathetic than powerless." She picked up her cup, drained the last drop of tea, and stood. "I have things to do." She swept past me and headed for the door. I slid off my chair and followed, heart pounding. In the hallway, she paused and turned. "You really need to accept that your era is over." Her eyes narrowed. "Letting go will save you a lot of heartache." I swallowed hard. "Letting go? You've taken everything. My house, my dignity, my memories. The only thing I won't let go is the truth." Her lips curved into a mirthless grin. "Truth is subjective, Grandpa, and time waits for no one." Then she walked away, clicking her heels on the hardwood floor. As the door closed behind her, I felt both hollow and aflame. Hollow because of her cruelty, aflame because of the resolve stirring inside me. I knew I couldn't plead any longer. I would have to fight. I drifted into the sunroom, where afternoon light slanted through the lace curtains. The space felt polluted by her presence. The expensive desk, the ornate chair I'd never approve of, the shelves filled with her self-help books on estate planning. I pulled my recorder and notebook from my coat pocket and laid them on the small round table. I thought of Marie's voice, soft and steady. "Stand firm, Charles. Hold on to what's right." I closed my eyes and let her words guide me. I'd already collected evidence. Now I needed allies and a plan.
First, I would see my lawyer. He'd known me since the day I signed the mortgage. He'd always championed fairness. If anyone could untangle the web of forgeries and fake deeds, it was him. Then I would reach out to the county clerk's office. I'd demand copies of every transfer document. I would trace every signature, confront every witness, and expose this conspiracy for what it was, but I would also steel myself for the worst, that David might step in her shadow instead of mine. I'd braced myself for that pain before, but now it fueled me. I would not let my own son's silence be the final verdict on my life's work. I set down my pen and leaned back in the chair. The afternoon light warmed my face, but my jaw was cold with determination. The neighbor's kindness and the memory of my wife had strengthened my backbone. Regina had pushed me to the brink, but she hadn't broken me. That night, I laid out my plan on the kitchen table. Notes, documents, even the recorder. I stared at the items for a long moment, each one a weapon in this battle for justice. I brewed fresh tea, the steam carrying the scent of peppermint and resolve. Tomorrow, I would begin. I would knock on my lawyer's door, face the clerk's counter, and call every person who had witnessed Regina's schemes. I would reclaim not just the house, but the dignity and love it represented. As I closed my notebook and blew out the lamp, I felt the stirrings of hope. The war had escalated, but so had my resolve. The man who once thought love would shield him had learned that sometimes love requires courage to defend. And with that courage burning in my chest, I drifted into sleep, ready to face whatever the dawn would bring. I arrived at Carter & Moore, my lawyer's modest brick office, just as the morning sun gilded its dusty windows. The brass nameplate on the door read, Henry Carter-esque. I'd known Henry longer than I'd known my own son. He'd guided me through the mortgage on this house, the refinancing after the medical bills for Marie's last illness, and even the paperwork for David's college loans. I paused outside, drawing a slow breath, and let my fingers brush the envelope in my coat pocket, thick with the deeds, the forged will draft, and the recorder's proof. Henry greeted me in the waiting room with a broad smile and outstretched hand. His office smelled of leather-bound books and rich mahogany. "Charles," he said, his eyes softening as he took my hand, "what brings you in today?" His calm presence steadied my racing heart. I settled into his high-backed chair, careful not to knock over the potted fern on the side table. "Henry," I began, voice low, "I have some things we need to discuss. About my will." My words felt treacherous on my tongue, as though I were confessing a sin. He closed his ledger and sat forward. "Go on." I laid the envelope on his desk and removed the recorder first. I pressed play. Regina's clipped voice echoed through the room, followed by David's reluctant assent. Henry's brow furrowed. When the tape clicked off, he sat back, silent for a moment. "This is troubling," he said finally. "Forgery, deceit, concealment. These are serious offenses." He slid his reading glasses onto his nose and examined the deed transfer application. "She attempted to transfer ownership without your knowledge or consent, and it appears she even forged your signature on a draft will." I pressed my palms flat on the desk. "I want to remove David and Regina from my will. I want to leave everything to the Charles and Marie Trust, for community housing and scholarships in your name, Henry, for families in need, and I want a clause. If anyone contests, everything goes to the local veterans charity." Henry nodded, thumbing through a worn folder. "I understand your pain. This isn't done lightly, but removing your son is within your rights. We'll draft a new will specifying your wishes, the home, the land, the savings, all to the trust." He paused. "Are you sure you want to take such a permanent step?" My throat tightened. I pictured Marie's gentle smile as we stood over the freshly poured foundation all those years ago. I heard her soft voice. "Protect what's sacred, Charles." I could almost feel her hand on my arm. "I am," I said firmly. "I've given every chance for reconciliation. I've lost my home, my dignity, and nearly my life's work. I can't give them any more chances to betray me, and I can't let them destroy what Marie and I built for good." Henry exhaled, respect shining in his eyes. He reached for a fresh sheaf of parchment. "Very well, let's begin." He guided me through each clause, naming the Charles and Marie Community Trust as primary beneficiary, detailing uses, housing for veterans, educational grants for disadvantaged youths, upkeep of the property as a community center, and finally, the no contest provision. Any challenge by David or Regina would forfeit their rights entirely, redirecting their share to the local veterans charity. As we wrote, I felt a mixture of relief and sorrow. Relief that I was reclaiming control, sorrow for the son I was cutting loose. Henry paused after drafting the disinheritance clause. "Disinheriting your child is a heavy decision, Charles," he said quietly, "but given the evidence, it seems justified." I looked down at my shaking hands. It's as though he's been possessed by her ambition, I whispered. He was always my boy, kind, respectful, but I can't trust him anymore. Henry nodded. Sometimes love has limits when betrayal is complete. He slid the pen across the desk. Sign here. I gripped the pen, feeling its cool weight, and signed my name with deliberate strokes. The signature felt foreign, sharp, unyielding, like steel. Henry then signed as witness and notarized the document. He poured 2 cups of coffee from a silver carafe. "You've done what you needed to do," he said, passing me a cup. "Now, the next steps are to store the original here, and we'll provide you with copies. Keep one safe, give one to your trustee." I watched the steam rise from the coffee, thinking how many mornings Marie and I had shared coffee on the porch. I sipped, grateful for the warmth, for Henry's steady counsel. Before I left, Henry placed a comforting hand on my shoulder. "You're not alone in this, Charles. If you need support, or if they try to contest, come straight to me. We'll face it together." I nodded, swallowed hard, and let gratitude swell in my chest. "Thank you, Henry. I don't know what I would have done without you." Outside, the sun was higher now, casting crisp shadows on the pavement. I tucked the stamped and sealed will into my coat pocket. Each step back home was lighter than any I'd taken in months, no longer burdened by doubt. I'd forged a new path, one where my legacy was secured, and justice had been served. That evening, I lit Marie's favorite candle in the living room, lavender and honey, and sat in her old armchair. I imagined her beside me, nodding in approval. I spoke aloud, though the room was empty. "This is for you, my love, for our home, our story, and the lives we'll still touch." In that flickering glow, I felt both grief and resolution. The pen had been heavier than any hammer or saw, but it had rebuilt my future more firmly than any beam I'd ever laid. And though the cost had been a son's inheritance, I knew I'd safeguarded something far more precious, the honor of a lifetime's work and the memory of my beloved Marie. I woke to the shrill ring of my phone before dawn. My heart sank when I saw the caller ID, Regina's orange text bubble glowing on the screen. I pressed answer with a trembling thumb. "Grandpa," her voice chimed, too bright for that hour. "The movers arrive tomorrow at 9. You'll need to have everything out by then." My breath caught. "Movers? What?" "We're selling the furniture," she interrupted. "We've already contracted with Heritage Estates. They'll handle the disposals, and the proceeds go toward the renovations." I sank back against the pillows, the lavender-scented sheets, Marie's favorite, twisting in my grasp. "Renovations? You mean to accommodate your parents?" Her laugh sounded brittle. "Exactly. I need space for them on the first floor. You can store your things in the garage until you decide on assisted living." I looked around the bedroom that had been ours for nearly 5 decades. The mahogany dresser where Marie kept her letters. The framed photo of our wedding, she in lace and me in a rumpled suit. The pale blue quilt I'd sewn stitch by stitch. All slated for strangers to haul away. "I won't leave," I said. The words surprised me, brighter and firmer than I felt. Regina paused. "Don't make this harder than it has to be, Grandpa. We've been patient." I ended the call and stared at the ceiling, shadows drifting like ghosts. I remembered the first time I helped Marie fold laundry on that bedspread, humming old hymns. I recalled how our daughter-in-law had once admired the quilt's patchwork and asked if she could learn to sew one day. That memory felt like a lie. By mid-morning, I gathered cardboard boxes from the garage. I labeled them personal, do not move, kitchenware, photographs and documents. As I worked, a hollow dread filled me. This was no longer a threat, it was a timeline. 24 hours until strangers dismantled my life. Neighbors glanced my way as I carried boxes across the yard. Mrs. Caldwell paused on her porch, concern etched into her forehead. I managed a small wave. She didn't step forward, fearing perhaps to overstep, but her eyes spoke solidarity. I realized I was both blessed and cursed. Blessed with allies who cared, cursed with the knowledge that I'd allowed this betrayal to fester far too long. Inside, I rounded up every memento I could find. The old harmonica Marie had played for me on our 10th anniversary, the yellowed program from David's first school play, my father's leather-bound Bible, its spine cracked from decades of use. One by one, I tucked these relics into the personal boxes, as though I could stow away pieces of my soul. Late afternoon, I climbed into the attic to retrieve the original beam Marie and I had painted with our initials. Dust motes danced in the narrow beam of sunlight from the skylight. I traced the faded red letters, C&M 1967, and felt a tremor in my chest. I lifted the beam down the ladder, arms shaking under its weight. I'd never revisited it since I stored it away after the funeral. Now I grasped it like a shield, as if it could guard me through whatever was coming. That evening, I sat at the kitchen table, spread with boxes and tape, and drafted a terse letter to the movers. Do not remove any items marked personal, do not move. I signed it Charles H. Abbott, hoping sheer formality might grant it weight. I slipped it into an envelope and placed it by the front door. I could feel Regina's plan crawling closer, like a train barreling down the tracks. I laid out my clothes for the next day, clean shirt, sturdy shoes, preparing for the confrontation I knew was inevitable. I arranged the recorder and a copy of my new will on the table, deciding that if things turned ugly, I would capture every moment. As darkness fell, I lit a single candle, Marie's lavender honey scent flickering against the cold tile floor. I held the attic beam like a talisman and whispered into the silence, I will not let this house be stolen from me. Sleep that night was restless. I dreamt of the porch swing breaking beneath me, of the front door slamming in my face. I awoke at the crack of dawn, heart pounding, to the murmur of engines on the driveway. Steeling myself, I donned my coat, pocketed with will copies, the envelope, and the recorder, and stepped outside. The moving van's doors were open, furniture disappearing into its cavernous hold. 2 uniformed men lifted the mahogany dresser, their faces blank. Regina stood nearby, arms crossed. Tomorrow, I'd confront her. Today, I watched as the last of our possessions slipped away, and in that loss, I felt a fierce determination harden within me. When the dust settled, there would be a reckoning. With the beam in one hand and conviction in my heart, I turned toward the looming front door, ready, at last, for the confrontation that would decide my future. I arrived at Regina's so-called housewarming celebration, just as the late afternoon sun gilded the freshly painted siding. They'd invited half the neighborhood, neighbors I'd known for decades, as well as a few of their new friends. Real estate agents, a caterer in a polyester uniform, even the county clerk who'd signed off on the deed transfer. I felt the recorder tucked in my coat pocket against my chest, and in my other hand I held the original will and the forged signature comparison Henry had prepared. I slipped through the side gate, unlocked of course, for guests only, and stepped onto the patio where folding chairs formed a semicircle around a makeshift podium. A banner fluttered overhead. Welcome home, Charles and Regina, the next chapter. The irony tightened my throat. Regina greeted me at the foot of the stairs, her smile stretched too wide. Dad, I didn't expect you to come, she said, voice dripping surprise. Her hand landed lightly on my arm, as if she could shoo me away like a stray cat. I nodded, voice steady. I wouldn't miss this for the world. I raised my cane, tapping it once on the stone pavers. Immediate hush fell. Forks paused, laughter stilled, glasses lifted halfway to lips. All eyes turned to me, curious, judgmental, some mirrored embarrassment. David stood beside Regina, shoulders tight, gaze flicking between his wife and me. I caught the flicker of shame in his eyes, proof that somewhere inside him, the son I raised still struggled with the man she'd turned him into. Regina stepped aside. Dad would like to say a few words, she announced to the crowd, tone polite but laced with condescension. She gestured to the podium. I climbed the few steps, heart pounding, and placed the will and documents on the lectern. I cleared my throat. Thank you all for coming, I began, voice calm but carrying. I see you've celebrated my new beginning. But before we raise our glasses, I have something to share. I lifted the recorder. This is a recording made in my home, by someone I trusted with my signature. I pressed play. Regina's clipped voice echoed, "He won't understand until it's done," followed by David's hesitant agreement. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. I switched off the recorder. That was my daughter-in-law discussing the secret transfer of my deed, and that was my son agreeing. I paused, letting the weight of their betrayal settle over the silent guests. I trusted them both. I welcomed them under this roof. But they planned to strip me of everything, my home, my memories, and my dignity. I picked up the original will and held it high. This is the will I signed today, removing any claim they have to my property or savings. Everything now belongs to the Charles and Marie Community Trust, with a clause that if anyone contests this decision, all assets go to the Veterans Memorial Fund. A gasp rose from Regina's mother, and I saw some neighbors shift uncomfortably. The county clerk swallowed hard, eyes darting away. Regina's wedding planner turned friend looked scandalized, apologizing under her breath to the real estate agent. Regina stepped forward, face pale. You can't do this," she stammered. "This is my home now." "It's my home until the day I die," I replied, voice firmer than I'd felt in months. "And if you loved your husband, you'd have honored the man who built it, not betrayed him." David's eyes filled with tears. He opened his mouth, closed it, and finally turned to Regina. "Regina, what have you done?" His voice cracked like a twig underfoot. Silence enveloped us. The caterer's assistant let a tray of shrimp cocktail clatter to the ground. Someone muttered, "I had no idea." I set down the will. "I've withdrawn my financial support. I'm cutting ties with anyone who treats me as a liability." My gaze swept the crowd. "If you're here for pastries and lawn games, please enjoy them. But if you think betrayal is acceptable, you're not welcome in my life." Regina's shoulders sagged. She looked to her parents, who shifted their weight. No support in their eyes. My son took a hesitant step forward. I saw the conflict in him. The man who once held my hand as he learned to walk, now torn between his wife's ambition and his father's love. I raised one finger. "I forgive no one yet, but I hope someday David finds his way back." Then softer. "I hope he remembers the man who taught him to stand tall." I turned and descended the steps, Cain tapping each one, leaving the hush of the patio behind me. In the driveway, I paused and looked back at the home I've loved all my life. The banner drooped, the folding chairs emptying, faces turned away. I felt no regret, only a solemn pride that I'd defended my legacy. As I reached the gate, I heard one neighbor call after me, "Charles, thank you for telling the truth." I nodded, shoulders squared, and walked down the dusty lane toward the streetlight that would guide me home. Do you think the father made the right choice? Comment, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more true life stories. I stepped off the porch and let the screen door click shut behind me, the sound echoing in the sudden hush that settled over the yard. The folding chairs stood empty, the catered spread half picked through, and the banner, "Welcome Home," flapped listlessly in the evening breeze. I felt the pulse of the day's adrenaline draining from my limbs as I walked down the path, cane in hand, back toward the dusty lane that led home. The sky was awash of lavender and gold, the trees whispering overhead like old friends murmuring their sympathy. I paused at the gate, leaning on my cane, and closed my eyes. For the first time in months, I felt the world draw a breath around me. No taunts, no whispered judgments, only the soft rustle of leaves and the distant hum of cicadas. A peace I hadn't known since Marie's last days settled in my chest. I reached home just as the street lamps flickered on, casting pools of light on the familiar brick walkway. Inside, the living room was quiet, save for the gentle tick of the grandfather clock that had marked so many milestones. David's first steps, Marie's birthday mornings, ordinary Sunday evenings. Tonight, that ticking sounded like a heartbeat of survival, steady and unyielding. I sank into the armchair by the window, the one where Marie and I shared so many dawns, and let the events of the day drift back through my mind. I'd faced them all, the guests, the recordings, the banner of betrayal. I'd made my case, reclaimed my voice, and drawn a line in the sand. Almost every face at that party had turned away, but enough had stayed silent witnesses to know the truth. The house felt cavernous, without David and Regina's footsteps filling the hallway. I listened. No laughter drifting from the kitchen, no clatter of dishes in the sink. It was as though the walls themselves were holding their breath, waiting to see what I'd do next. I spread my arms wide and breathed deeply, as if to fill every corner with my presence. Outside, the night deepened. I rose and walked to the back door, stepping onto the deck where, not so long ago, I'd hosted summer barbecues and garden teas. The chairs were stacked neatly in the corner, and the grill stood cold. Regina's gesture, I supposed, of new beginnings. In a small gesture of defiance, I placed the beam I'd carried from the attic atop the coasters on the table. C&M 1967. Let this remain, I thought, evidence of what truly built this home. A few moments later, a soft knock came at the kitchen window. I wiped my hands on my shirt and opened it to find Mrs. Caldwell standing there, holding 2 steaming mugs. She offered one to me through the glass. I lifted an eyebrow. "I thought you might need this," she said, voice gentle as the wind. She didn't wait for an invitation. She stepped inside, set the mugs on the counter, and poured sugar into mine. "I'm so sorry about today," she murmured. "No one should have to fight their family to keep their home." Tears pricked my eyes, more for the kindness in her gesture than the pain of the fight. "Thank you," I whispered. I wasn't sure what I'd find inside. She patted my hand. "You'll find yourself, Charles, and that's enough." Without another word, she slipped out into the night, leaving me with the warmth of her visit and the smell of coffee lingering in the kitchen. I wandered back to the living room, mug in hand, and turned on a small lamp beside the bookshelf. I pulled down a dusty volume of Marie's favorite poems and flipped to a random page. Her handwriting curled in the margins. "Courage is love enduring." I traced the words with my finger, tasting the sweetness of her memory. Sleep came slowly that night. I lay in the dark, listening to the house settle, feeling both the ache of solitude and the comfort of sovereignty. In the morning, the sun streamed through the curtains in brilliant streaks, illuminating motes of dust that danced like tiny sparks, reminders that life still moved forward, even if at my own pace. Over the next few days, I found a rhythm in the silence. Each morning, I brewed coffee and sat on the porch swing, watching the dawn soften the world. I no longer timed how long it took for breakfast to be served. Instead, I prepared it myself, humming old hymns as I cooked. It felt strange at first, no Regina to direct me, no David to brush past me on his way to work. But I found comfort in the little routines I'd once shared with them. Neighbors crossed the street less often now, giving me space or nodding in quiet respect. A few stopped to ask if I needed help with the yard, and I welcomed their company, telling stories of the house's early days and of Marie's garden that once bloomed shoulder-high with lilies. It felt good to share those memories with people who hadn't turned their backs. One afternoon, I took my cane and walked the old path through the woods behind the property, trails I'd carved out with David when he was a boy. Sunlight filtered through the canopy, and the scent of pine and damp earth filled my lungs. I paused at the clearing where we used to fish in the creek, tracing its gentle curve with my cane. I remembered his laughter as a child chasing turtles, and I let that memory settle beside the grief of losing him as a companion in my later years. On the way back, I spotted a new sapling planted near the edge of the lawn, thin, green, hopeful. I knelt and felt the soil around its roots. "Grow strong," I whispered, patting the earth. It reminded me that life renews itself in unexpected places. By evening, I felt a quiet pride in the house that stood behind me. The windows reflected the sunset in hues of amber and rose, a home alive with possibility rather than weighed by betrayal. I carried my mug back inside and set it on the counter beside the boxes still waiting to be unpacked. I paused there, hand resting on the countertop, and looked around. No portraits of Regina's parents, no impersonal prints on the walls. Instead, the worn quilt lay folded on the sofa, the hollyhocks Marie planted still blooming by the sill, the grandfather clock marking each moment with gentle precision. In that silence, I realized something. This house was more than walls and floors. It was a vessel for memory, for love, and for new beginnings. I could fill it with people of my choosing, neighbors, friends, the veterans who'd served as I did, or even strangers in need of a warm bed and a hot meal. I had the power to shape its future. I rose from the counter and walked back to the living room. I sat in Marie's armchair, opened the curtains wide, and let the last light of day spill across the floor. The house exhaled around me, at peace for the first time in too long. Tomorrow, I would begin drawing up plans for the community rooms. I would call Henry and arrange to transfer keys to the trust. I would invite the veterans from the local group, share my story with them, and listen to theirs in return. This house, our house, would live again, not as the backdrop to betrayal, but as a testament to resilience and chosen family. As night fell, I closed my eyes and listened to the clock's steady tick. I thought of Marie, of David as a boy, of Regina's harsh words and neighbors' kindness, and I smiled, knowing that in the silence after the storm, I had found my voice, and finally, my home. When Mrs. Caldwell returned the next morning, she did more than drop off coffee. She brought a neighbor I hadn't seen in years, Captain Willis Drexel, a retired Army officer whose widow's son had once boarded here when he was lost in the world. I invited them both in, and over mugs of steaming tea, he told me how worn and weathered veterans often needed a place to land, somewhere with a roof, a meal, and a listening ear. His voice was calm but earnest. "Charles," he said, "you've got space to spare, and a heart that understands service. Why not open these rooms to those who served?" He tapped the table, sending ripples through the old varnish. "We could start small, 1 or 2 boarders. folks who've given decades to their country and now find themselves adrift. I sat back in Marie's armchair, the hems of my pants catching on the cushion. My gaze drifted to the hallway, once a gauntlet of silence, and then to the spare bedroom where Regina's parents had installed that ridiculous floral wallpaper. I pictured that room filled instead with laughter and conversation, with veterans sharing stories I'd never heard. A spark lit in my chest. The walls that had echoed betrayal could echo something richer. Over the next hour, Willis and Mrs. Caldwell helped me sketch out a plan on a scrap pad, 2 spare bedrooms converted into private suites, a communal dining area in the sunroom, a small kitchenette for nightly meals, and a bookshelf stocked with biographies and history volumes. We listed names of local veterans groups, mental health counselors, and social services who might recommend boarders. As we talked, I felt a shift inside me, an energy that wasn't just resolve, but hope. I'd thought the house's best days were behind me. Instead, I realized I'd only repurposed its purpose, from family fortress to sanctuary. When I told Willis I wasn't sure where to start, he reached across the table, his hand like a lifeline. "We start by clearing those rooms," he said. "We call the contractor, we buy paint, and we welcome our first guest." By midday, I'd retrieved the spare room key from my desk drawer and unlocked the door for the first time in months. The room was bare, except for a single bed frame and the tacky wallpaper Regina had chosen. I ran my fingers over the floral print, pink roses and ferns dancing in an outdated pattern, and felt a swell of determination. I fetched the crowbar from the garage and pried the old molding loose, peeling away paper strip by strip. Dust swirled in the golden sunlight as Willis and I removed nails and staples together. That afternoon, Mrs. Caldwell drove me to the hardware store. I picked out paint swatches, sage green for calm, dove gray for dignity, and stacked cans in the trunk. We bought new linens, nightstands, and a lamp with a soft, warm bulb. As I wheeled the cart past aisles of garden hoses and light fixtures, I felt a thrill I hadn't known since opening the original deed. This was creation, not destruction. Back home, I climbed the ladder with a paint roller in hand. I remembered the first coat of primer Marie and I applied when we built this room for David's nursery, how her laughter carried like chimes through the rafters. Now, with each swipe of green, I felt her presence beside me, approving, guiding. By nightfall, the walls were transformed, ready for the next step, furnishings. Over the next week, I tackled the second spare room, lined shelves in the sunroom with donated books, and scrubbed every surface until it shone. I met with my lawyer, Henry, to discuss liability and agreements, ensuring I had simple lease forms and basic house rules ready. Henry admired the idea. "This is fitting," he said. "Your home was built on community. Now it will welcome strangers who become family." I also reached out to the local Veterans Outreach Center. Captain Drexel and I sat in their modest office, and I explained our vision. Within days, they recommended 2 boarders. Sergeant Kim, who'd served in 2 overseas tours and was struggling with PTSD, and Lieutenant Ramirez, recently discharged and trying to rebuild his life after a divorce. On paperwork and by phone, I invited them personally. "My home is open to you," I'd written, "for as long as you need." When Sergeant Kim arrived, he carried a duffel bag and a wary expression. I showed him to the freshly painted room, offered him a cup of tea, and listened as he described the long nights he'd spent unable to sleep. In the morning, he'd join me for coffee on the porch, and I'd watch the sunrise with him as he talked quietly about home. Lieutenant Ramirez was more talkative. He laughed easily and helped me mount shelves in the sunroom. He brought photos of his young daughter, and I felt the old fathering instinct bloom once more. Within 2 weeks, the house felt alive. Laughter drifted down the hallway. Steam rose from the kettle in the morning. Shared meals filled the dining table that Regina once ignored. In the evenings, I'd sit by the fireplace and listen to stories of service and sacrifice, sometimes sharing my own. How I built these walls with a woman I loved, how I raised a son, and how I'd learned that pride without compassion is an empty legacy. As my confidence grew, I wrote letters to community groups, veterans clubs, faith organizations, even the local Rotary, inviting them to visit our Veterans Haven. Neighbors who once crossed to the other side of the street now stopped by with casseroles, fruit baskets, and words of encouragement. Mrs. Patel from down the block knelt beside the garden I'd retended and planted new lilies. She said they reminded her of hope. One evening, after a hearty stew, I sat with Willis and Henry over a slice of apple pie, the first dessert I'd made in months. We discussed expanding, maybe opening 2 more rooms or offering weekend retreats for widows of veterans. Ideas tumbled out, each one more ambitious than the last. I realized I was no longer just reclaiming my home. I was redefining its very purpose. Late that night, I stood in the hallway looking at each open doorway, the spare rooms, the sunroom shelves, the living room where the veterans gathered. I felt a rush of pride and peace. This was the home I always dreamed it could be, not defined by blood or betrayal, but by community and compassion. I pressed my hand to the wall where Marie's and my initials still faintly showed through the paint. C&M 1967. I whispered, "We did it, my love." And in the hush of that old house, I swear I heard her laughter drifting down the corridor, warm as a sunrise. I first realized I had a new family the evening Mrs. Caldwell knocked on my door, holding 2 steaming bowls of soup. She'd invited a few of the veterans to join us in the sunroom for a simple meal. Just bread, soup, and stories. As I carried the bowls in, I paused at the threshold and watched 6 faces light up around the table. Sergeant Kim, spoon poised midair in a grin. Lieutenant Ramirez, eyes bright as he passed crackers. Captain Drexel, quietly savoring the aroma, and 2 new arrivals, Corporal Nguyen, a soft-spoken man who'd lost his leg overseas, and Petty Officer Jacobs, a veteran of the Navy who'd recently lost his wife. They were not related to me by blood, nor did they share my name or my history. Yet as they laughed at my clumsy joke about botching the soup seasoning, "Needs more salt, Mr. Abbott," Kim teased, I felt warmth swell in my chest. This home, once fractured by betrayal, was alive again with connection. After dinner, we migrated to the living room, where I fetched my late wife's quilt from the sofa and spread it across 2 armchairs. Jacobs leaned back, closing his eyes as if he could still feel his wife's arms around him. Ramirez joined me near the fireplace, and I drew another chair close for Nguyen. Soon, all 5 were clustered around the hearth, faces bathed in firelight. Corporal Nguyen cleared his throat softly. "When I first moved in, I thought I'd be invisible. Just a boarder here to pay rent and sleep. But this," he gestured to the room, "this feels like home." His voice cracked, and I saw tears glisten in his eyes. I placed a hand on his shoulder. "You're not invisible here, Nguyen. You're family." He nodded, wiping his eyes. "Family I chose." That phrase struck me. I thought of the hollow chairs down the hallway, of a son who'd once stood by me, but now stood silent. Here, though, I saw loyalty and respect in every line of their faces. I thought of Marie's gentle insistence that kindness be our guiding principle, and realized this was the fruition of that lesson. Captain Drexel leaned forward, tapping the quilt. "I've lived 20 years in barracks and billets," he said, voice low. "But this is the first place since my discharge where I've felt a real sense of belonging." He looked at me with that steady confidence of a leader. "You've given us a gift, Charles." I took a slow breath, feeling the weight of his words. "No," I said, voice thick. "You've given me the gift of your presence." Petty Officer Jacobs shifted on the quilt. "My wife used to knit blankets for the homeless shelter," she explained. "This one," she patted the fabric, "I think she'd have approved of your cause." I remembered Marie's calm determination, how she'd always used her craft to help others. I told Jacobs how this quilt had once crowned our wedding bed, and how every stitch had been tied with a prayer for happiness. Now it sheltered veterans whose prayers had gone unanswered. As the night deepened, stories unfolded around me. Ramirez spoke of navigating fatherhood after divorce. Kim recounted dark nights when nightmares chased him. Nguyen described his struggle to find employment with his injury. Jacob shared memories of a life partner taken too soon. I listened, offering what I could, a sympathetic ear, a gentle word, sometimes just silence. When the clock chimed 10, I rose and offered coffee and cookies. They drifted into the sunroom, continuing their conversation beneath the soft glow of string lights I'd hung just days before. I watched them from the hallway, 5 souls forging bonds stronger than steel. Later, as I climbed the stairs toward my bedroom, I paused at the door of the room Regina's parents once occupied. The floral wallpaper was gone. In its place stood a wooden sign I'd painted myself, "Room of Rest and Renewal." I smiled to see a small potted fern on the windowsill, placed there by Nguyen, and a stack of well-worn novels on the nightstand, courtesy of Ramirez. In my own room, I sat at the bedside and unclipped Marie's portrait from the wall. I held it close, feeling her presence. I spoke aloud. "Look at what we've built, my love. They came as strangers, and now they're my family." That night, sleep came easily. I dreamed of the laughter and the stories, of faces illuminated by candlelight and the crackling fire. I dreamed of a long table set for 12, Neighbors, veterans, friends, all gathered under the roof that once echoed with betrayal, now thrumming with warmth. The next morning, I found a note slipped under my door in neat handwriting. Dear Charles, thank you for last night. You gave us more than a room. You gave us a home again. With gratitude, Sergeant Kim, Lieutenant Ramirez, Captain Drexel, CPL Nguyen, and P.O. Jacobs. I pinned the note to the bulletin board by the kitchen and brewed a pot of coffee. As the aroma drifted through the halls, I thought of the word family. It used to mean bloodlines and shared history. Now it meant shared respect, mutual support, and chosen loyalty. By midweek, the house had settled into a new rhythm. Morning coffee on the porch with Kim and Ramirez, lunches prepared together in the sunroom, evenings by the fire, sometimes with a neighbor dropping by, sometimes just with Mrs. Caldwell's gentle presence. The old echoes of eviction and betrayal felt like distant nightmares. One afternoon, I sat at my kitchen table drafting invitations for a founder's brunch, an event to celebrate the house's rebirth and to thank the community. I included veterans, neighbors, local officials, and friends. As I wrote, I reflected on the irony. Once upon a time, I would have planned a family gathering here to watch David and Regina's lives unfold. Now I was planning a celebration with people who truly saw me for who I was. When Captain Drexel stopped by with fresh flowers from the farmer's market, cornflowers and daisies, I showed him the invitation draft. He nodded approvingly. This will be the real housewarming, he said. This is the family that matters. I laughed, warm and genuine. Yes, I agreed. This is real family. And as I placed the invitation among the stack of mementos on my desk, letters from veterans, photographs of our first boarders, and Marie's poem about home, I knew that come the day of the brunch, every seat around the table would be filled not by entitlement, but by love, earned and chosen. Because in the end, home isn't defined by blood. It's defined by the hearts willing to welcome you in. And here, in this house built of bricks and memories, I had found the truest family of all. I was in the sunroom, arranging fresh daisies in a vase on the windowsill, when I heard a soft rap at the front door. It wasn't the confident knock of a neighbor bringing soup or the steady approach of Captain Drexel on his daily walk. It sounded hesitant, almost apologetic. My heart thudded, half hoping it was Mrs. Caldwell with good news, half fearing it was someone I didn't want to see. When I opened the door, there she stood, my granddaughter Lily. She wore the same nervous expression I remembered from her 8th birthday, fidgeting with the hem of her skirt, eyes large and anxious. Her glossy waves brushed her shoulders, and in her hand she clutched a small velvet box. "Grandpa," she whispered, voice trembling. "May I come in?" I stepped aside wordlessly. She entered slowly, as if the walls themselves might judge her. I closed the door but didn't lock it. Old habits die hard, but I wanted to show I wasn't building walls against her. Not anymore. She slipped off her shoes and set the velvet box on the coffee table. I gestured to the armchair where she used to curl up as a child. "Sit, Lily." She perched on the edge of the cushion, hands folded in her lap. I poured 2 glasses of iced tea and handed one to her. She sipped, then placed it carefully on the coaster, staring at the floorboards as though they held the answers to her questions. I'm sorry," she began, voice thick. I know you went through so much, and I should have stood up for you. I should have spoken up when they were humiliating you." Tears welled in her eyes. I felt the ache of her words more than any insult Regina or David had hurled. My own son's silence had wounded me deeply, but my granddaughter's admission opened a fresh cut. "Lily," I said softly, "it wasn't your fault. You're young, and they told you everything was fine. You didn't see what I was going through. You were—" I caught myself, then chose my words. "You were being protected." She looked up, confusion mixed with relief. "Protected," she echoed. I nodded. "Your parents shielded you from a lot of heartache. They didn't want you to see violence, so they made me the villain in a story you grew up with." I gestured at the faded quilt draped over the sofa. "They painted me as unstable, unreasonable. I understand why you believed them." Lily bit her lip. "But I heard whispers. At school, kids said Grandpa was crazy, that he treated Grandma's house badly. I never asked you because I was scared. I thought I was on their side." I rose and crossed to the windowsill, pushing aside a stray curtain. The late afternoon light spilled across the garden, where pink lilies nodded in the breeze. I inhaled deeply, remembering how Marie used to prune them. Turning back, I sat on the arm of the chair, close enough to comfort, but not crowd. "You've carried someone else's story," I said. "But today, you have a chance to learn the truth from me. No one forced you to stay silent, except your own fear. But I'm proud you came here, Lily. That took courage." She exhaled, small and tremulous. "I brought this." She opened the velvet box and revealed a delicate silver locket embossed with our family crest. I hadn't seen it in years. "I found it in my jewelry box," she continued. "Mom said it was Grandma's, that you gave it to her when she was young. She put the locket around my neck. I want you to have it now." I felt the cool metal rest against my chest, just above my heart. The locket's weight was gentle, but its meaning pressed heavily. Marie had given it to me on our 20th anniversary, carving our initials inside. Then, after her passing, it went to David's first wife, Regina, who stored it away in a velvet pouch and forgot it behind her dresser. Lily had rescued it. "Thank you," I said, voice thick. I touched the clasp, remembering Marie's voice. "Keep love close, no matter the storms." I closed my eyes for a moment, and when I opened them, Lily was watching me, her shoulders relaxed, her eyes shining. "I'm sorry for what they made you go through," she whispered. I should have known better, but I'm here now. I want to help fix things if you'll let me." I studied her face, so like Marie's in the curve of her cheek, so like David's in the set of her jaw. But she was her own person, capable of kindness and regret in equal measure. "I forgive you, Lily," I said, meaning every word. "You had no hand in the betrayal, but there are things you must understand. I'm not asking you to rebuild my trust overnight. Actions speak louder than apologies." She nodded. "I understand, Grandpa. I'll come by on weekends to help with the garden. I'll invite my friends to volunteer with the veterans. She broke off, anxiety creeping back. "Will you accept me back into your life?" I reached out, smoothing a wisp of hair from her forehead, just as Marie used to do with me when I was a boy. "The door's always open, Lily, but trust must be earned. Show me who you are now, not who they told you I was." Tears ran down her cheeks, and she nodded fiercely. "I will." We sat in silence for a few moments, the locket's cool presence a bridge between past and future. Finally she rose. "I should go now," she said, voice brightening, "but I'll come back tomorrow, with fresh dirt for the rose bushes." I smiled, a small, genuine curve of my lips. "I'll hold you to that." She paused at the threshold, hand on the doorknob. "I love you, Grandpa." And then she stepped outside, shoes soft on the porch, and closed the door gently behind her. I stood alone in the living room, the silver locket resting against my chest, and the late sunlight painting the floor in gold. I realized that forgiveness wasn't uniform. It wasn't a blanket over everyone who'd wronged me, but it could be a doorway for those who sought redemption sincerely. Closing my eyes, I whispered a silent prayer of gratitude, for Marie's enduring wisdom, for the chosen family who'd given me sanctuary, and for Lily's brave return. Then I unhooked the locket and placed it on the mantel beside Marie's photograph, a symbol that old wounds could be healed, but never forgotten. And as I turned toward the window, I saw Lily in the distance, digging in the flower bed, bright shovel in hand, planting seeds under the roof we'd built together. Have you ever felt betrayed by your own family? Let us know in the comments. I stood on the front porch at sunrise, the dew still clinging to the hollyhocks Marie planted so many years ago. Today was the day, the grand opening of Marjorie's house community home. I ran my hand along the freshly painted rail, its sage green color a symbol of new growth, and felt a tremor of pride ripple through my chest. Down below, the driveway was lined with folding chairs draped in white cloth, each one bearing a handwritten name card. On the left, Captain Drexel, Sergeant Kim, Lieutenant Ramirez, Corporal Nguyen, Petty Officer Jacobs. On the right, neighbors who'd brought casseroles and plants, members of the local Veterans Outreach, even Mrs. Caldwell with her gentle smile. At the very center, behind a simple wooden podium, was the ribbon, a length of lavender silk, echoing Marie's favorite hue. As the first guests arrived, I felt the warmth of community settle around me. Willis Drexel tipped his hat and saluted playfully. Kim gave me a thumbs up. Ramirez offered a hug, and Nguyen and Jacobs beamed. I shook hands, exchanged laughter, and let each moment settle like sunlight in my heart. When everyone was seated, I stepped up to the podium. In one pocket, I carried the original beam, C&M 1967, in my hand, a reminder of where this journey began. In the other, I held a pair of kitchen scissors for the ribbon. I cleared my throat. Good morning, I began, voice steady. Thank you for being here at Marjorie's house. Our home no longer defined by the blood it shares, but by the hearts who choose to fill it. I paused, letting the significance of the moment settle in their eyes. This house was built by my wife and me over 50 years ago. It sheltered our family through joys and sorrows, births and farewells. Today, it begins a new chapter, as a sanctuary for those who served and for every soul in need of welcome. Faces glowed in the morning light. I gestured toward the beam I held. This beam bears our initials, C&M 1967, and now it's more than a memory of my wife, Marjorie. It's a testament to love's endurance. I invite my dear friend Captain Drexel to join me in dedicating it to this home. Willis climbed the steps and took the beam. Together we affixed it above the front door, just beneath the eaves, where it would greet every visitor. The crowd gasped as the sunlight caught the faded red letters. May this home stand on the foundation of service, compassion, and chosen family, I intoned. Will and I stepped back, admiring the symbol. Next came the ribbon. I lifted the scissors, paused, and looked out at the faces before me, each one a story of struggle, resilience, and hope. With a deep breath, I snipped the silk. The ribbon fell away in a soft cascade, and applause rose like rushing water. We moved inside, where the sunroom brimmed with chatter and the scent of Mrs. Patel's lilies, combined with the smell of fresh coffee and baking bread. Veterans and neighbors mingled over tables laden with refreshments, savory quiche, fruit skewers, homemade cookies. I guided small groups through the house, pointing out the community library in the sunroom, the accessible kitchenette, the cozy reading nook by the fireplace, and finally the 2 guest suites, each painted in calming tones and furnished with quilts Marie would have admired. At the end of the tour, I found myself in what used to be my private study. Now it was a reflection room, its walls lined with photographs of boarders past and present, thank you notes from outreach groups, and a single display case holding Marie's silver locket. I touched the glass gently, remembering how my granddaughter returned it to me, another testament to the house's ability to mend old wounds. As the morning sun climbed higher, I stepped outside to address the guests once more. This is more than a boarding house, I said. It's a beacon of hope, proof that home is not just a place, but a promise, that no one stands alone. I looked at my new family, veterans in uniform and civilians in casual wear, all nodding, some with tears in their eyes. Thank you for believing in this vision with me. After the speeches, the event became a celebration. Music played softly, children chased bubbles across the lawn, and veterans exchanged stories on the porch swing. I found Mrs. Caldwell by the roses and thanked her for years of unwavering support. She smiled and said, "You gave all of us a home, Charles. We thank you." As the afternoon wore on, I slipped away to the attic, now cleared of its dust and old boxes, and retrieved the beam from its temporary perch in the sunroom. I carried it back downstairs and nestled it onto the mantel, alongside Marie's photograph. I lit a single lavender-scented candle beneath them. The glow danced on the beam's initials, binding past and present together. When twilight fell and the guests departed, leaving behind soft laughter and the promise of return, I sat in the armchair Marie once claimed. The house hummed with contentment, the hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen, the gentle tick of the clock, the distant drip of the fountain by the front gate. I closed my eyes and whispered into the quiet. We did it, my love. Marjorie's house lives again, and not as the setting of betrayal, but as the heart of a family we choose. I breathed deeply, the lavender candle flickering like a heartbeat. In that sacred moment, I knew that though blood had failed me, compassion had carried me home. And as I drifted into sleep that night, the house held its breath around me, no longer a fortress against the world, but a refuge for all who enter its doors. Marjorie's house, built on love and restored by courage, would stand for generations to come.